Hello. Chapter 18. The bedroom with two barred windows. Here you go. I think that might be Susan, the maid, and Tom, and there's Hattie in bed. Let's find out. James came out at last, shut Hattie's door behind him, and went along the landing to what must be his own room. Tom waited until he heard that door open and shut again. Then he set himself against Hattie's bedroom door and began pressing his way through. When Hattie saw him coming, she cried out in delight, "But please, Tom, please come through slowly. I want to see how it's done." "It's a knack," said Tom, but he obligingly slowed up his progress and made a very leisurely arrival onto the carpet of Hattie's bedroom. He felt better for it. Hattie was sitting up in bed with a bandage round her head. Her face was flushed with excitement, but not with fever. "Oh, I wish I could do that," she sighed at Tom, and sank back among her pillows. Tom studied her for a moment. Certainly, she looked older than she had when he had first known her. Hattie had been growing up just like the other Melbournes, and Tom had never noticed it, partly because they had been together so much, and partly because he was not observant of such things. "Well, how are you?" Tom asked. It would have been rude to stare longer. "Very well," said Hattie, "and the doctor says the scar won't show, and Cousin James has visited me, and he says I must do other things besides falling out of trees in the future." "Things without me?" said Tom, thinking of the grown-up parties at which James had spoken. "Oh no, Tom, whenever you want to come, so you shall." But Tom noticed that she spoke to him as if he were a child and she were not. "Sit down and talk to me, Tom," she begged him. He sat down on the end of the bed and looked round the room. "You've a nice bedroom." It was a spacious room, as were all the rooms in the Melbournes' handsome house. It had a large cupboard and two large windows, between which Hattie's bed stood, and across the bottom of the windows— "You've bars across the bottom of your windows," said Tom, "as if this were a nursery." And somewhere in his head the words seemed an echo of something he had once heard or said, and indeed the bars across the windows were like a remembrance of something once seen. "It was a nursery," said Hattie, "my cousin's nursery when they were little, and after that my nursery, and then, because I was the last child, it just stayed my room. Now it's my bedroom." Tom stared at the windows as if he were mesmerized. He was remembering that he had seen them, or rather one of them, or rather, again, each, but separately, never together. "Where is the bathroom in this house?" asked Tom. "Bathroom? Where do you have your bath?" "I have my bath here, in the bedroom, of course. The boys do in their rooms." "Here?" said Tom, staring around. "How?" "Why, there's the tin bath, and Susan carries cans of hot water up from the kitchen. In winter there's a fire lit here, and I have my bath by the fire." "You could make a proper bathroom here," said Tom, as though he saw it already done. "You could run a partition somewhere down the middle of this room here, so that there'd be a window on either side of the partition. Then this part of the room could still be a bedroom, and the room on the other side could be a bathroom." Hattie thought this an unnecessary and stupid idea, and said so. "Besides, this would only be a slice of the room then." "Yes," Tom agreed, "and a partition would be thin, and you'd always be able to hear the bath water next door as you lay here in bed." "I'd never want to hear that," Hattie said positively. "I don't suppose you ever will," said Tom. "Other people may." He moved over to the window and looked out. His gaze travelled far, first of all over a lawn, at one end of which a giant beech tree leaned in thought, over a hedge, a lane, another hedge, a meadow, with a great elm in the middle. Tom took a deep breath. "I like your room better," he said, "and I like your view much better." "And can you see the river beyond the meadow?" asked Hattie. "But Better than what, Tom? Better than if there were nothing but houses opposite. Hattie laughed. Don't be silly, Tom. If that was so, we shouldn't be living on the edge of a village as we do, but in a town. Or a village grown so big that it's really a town. He seemed to change the subject. How many baths do you have, Hattie? 1 a week. How many do you? 1 every other night. But I think I'd rather have fewer and have this room and the view. Hattie looked at him puzzled. She could not understand the connection of his thoughts, nor understand a sadness that seemed to have come over him. Tom, there's nothing to be sad about. Tom was thinking about the past, that time made so far away. Time had taken this present of Hattie's and turned it into his past. Yet even so, here and now, for a little while, this was somehow made his present too, his and Hattie's. Then he remembered the grandfather clock that measured out both his time and Hattie's, and he remembered the picture on the face. Hattie, what does the picture on the grandfather clock mean? Oh, it's something from the Bible. He was surprised. What? Hattie drew her brows together. It's difficult. I can't remember it. I mean, it's difficult to understand, so I can't remember it exactly. I'll find out if you want to know. Yes, please. Whom will you ask? Hattie smiled, but made no mystery of it, as an earlier Hattie might have done. I shall ask the clock. It's written there. Where? I've never seen it. No, you can't, because it's written so low down on the clock face that the writing is hidden by the frame of the dial glass. You have to open the dial door to read it. From inside the pendulum case, by a catch? Yes. But how did you know that? Never mind. Who keeps the key to the pendulum case? She smiled again. The grandfather clock. The key is always in the keyhole. Tom was shocked. But anyone might unlock it. Only Auntie needs to wind the clock. She has forbidden anyone else to touch it. But if strangers came to the house, inquisitive people, boys... Hattie simply did not understand him. She promised, however, that when she was next downstairs, and if there was nobody about, she would unlock the pendulum case and unlatch the dial door. Then Tom could read the secret for himself. There was nothing more that could be done now, so the subject was changed. Hattie took over the conversation as Tom seemed thoughtful and quiet. She entertained him with tales of the nursery bedroom, of how behind the slatted shutters of those front windows of the house bats slept in the daytime. You could fold back the shutters and see them hanging there, black among the grey cobwebs and dried wisteria leaves and dust, and how one night one had come into her room by mistake and swooped around it like a tiny black spectre. And she had screamed and screamed from under the sheet because Susan had told her that bats made for long hair and entangled themselves in it, and then all your hair had to be cut off. Tom smiled, and even Hattie smiled a little. Then there had been the summer when a wisteria tendril had come in at the top of the window and twined itself the whole length of the bell wire, for Hattie's uncle had seen it and ordered it to be cut. And when you lay still, you could hear mice running races behind the skirting boards. And there were always more mice after the harvest in the autumn, because they came in from the fields then. And then, of course, there was the cupboard. At this point, Hattie jumped out of bed to show Tom the cupboard. Not her clothes hanging there, but a secret hiding place she had had since she was a child, under the floorboards. She scrabbled with her fingernails and levered up a section of floorboard, and there below, in a roomy space between the joists, was her little hoard, her one-bladed fair knife, and a box of paints, and a small pale brown picture of a solemn-looking young gentleman leaning against an armchair in which sat a young woman. That was my mother and father, long ago. You remember, Tom, I once used to pretend to you that they were a king and queen. Then Hattie had to get quickly back into bed again, for they heard footsteps along the landing outside. Summer dusk had begun shadowing the window, and now Susan arrived with an oil lamp which she put on the mantel-shelf and lit. Then she went away and came back again with a bowl of bread and milk for Hattie's supper. While Hattie ate and Tom Tom and she talked on, and Tom warmed his fingers over the opening of the lamp glass and watched the shadow patterns his fingers made on the ceiling. From downstairs sounded the reverberation of the gong, calling the Melbournes to their evening meal. They heard footsteps and voices going downstairs. Susan came again and took away the empty bowl and the lamp, and bade Hattie lie down and go to sleep. When Susan had gone, Tom said he had better be going too. Very well, said Hattie. She never asked where he would go. I shall see you tomorrow, said Tom. Hattie smiled. You always say that, and then it's often months and months before you come again. I come every night, said Tom. He said good night to her and went downstairs. In the hall there was a smell of food, and Susan and another maid were running to and fro with plates and dishes. The family was dining. Tom paused to check that the key of the grandfather clock was in its keyhole. He longed to be able to turn it, but Hattie must do that for him. He stared at the angel on the clock face. He left the clock and went out into the garden, and then very deliberately came in again and, shutting his eyes, closed the door and bolted it. But when he opened his eyes again, the hall was still the Melbournes' hall. He went along it and upstairs, hoping desperately that even as he went, the stair carpet and rods would dissolve away beneath him, and he would find himself on the way to the Kitsons' flat and his own bedroom there and his own bed. No such thing happened. He reached Hattie's bedroom that should have been his. The door was ajar. Who's that? Hattie mumbled sleepily. It's only me, said Tom. I came back for something. Have you got it? No, said Tom, but it's all right. Good night, Hattie. Good night. He went downstairs and out into the garden and walked right round it under the flickering bats, and then he tried again. The house was still the same, the Melbournes' house. I shall never get back, Tom thought suddenly, and then, I'll tell Hattie. I'll ask her what to do. I'll tell her everything, even if it does mean talking about ghosts. He went upstairs and slid into the bedroom and called Hattie's name into the darkness. She did not reply, and when he listened he heard the regular breathing of a sleeper. He did not like to waken and frighten her, so he crouched down on the floor by the bed with his arms across one of hers, so that when she woke or even stirred, he would at once feel her movement. He let his head rest on his arm and gradually felt himself falling asleep. He did not know how much later it was when he woke, except that there was daylight in the room, and he was cramped from his position on the floor. At first he did not know where he was. Then he remembered sharply and clutched with his arm across the bed. But the bed was empty. No Hattie. Then he saw that the bed was his, not Hattie's, and that this too was his bedroom, only a slice of a room with one barred window. Tom did not understand how he came to be there, but he was grateful with all his heart. He was about to climb into his cold bed when he remembered the bedroom slipper that wedged the flat door open. It would never do for his aunt or uncle to find it there. Fortunately, the hour was still too early for them to be awake. He got the slipper, shut the front door, and went back to bed. There he lay, looking up at the ceiling, until he heard his uncle go into the bathroom on the other side of the flimsy partition and start the water running for an early bath. A moment afterwards his aunt came in to Tom, bringing the early cup of tea with which she spoiled him. It's time to get up, Tom. The post has just brought a letter from home. One for you from Peter, and one from me from your mother. How did he get back? Interesting. I wonder if we'll find out next time. Bye-bye.